Our story starts with Abby and Paul, a newly married couple who just moved into a beautiful house in the countryside. They're all smiles as they explore their new digs. It's got all the latest smart home features, from fancy cameras to reinforced glass for extra security. The real estate agent even shows them a giant window in the master bedroom with a dreamy view, perfect for gazing at the stars. There's also one extra room that's still empty, a blank canvas just waiting to be a nursery someday. After unpacking boxes and setting up their home, Abby and Paul head to the rooftop terrace. They're surrounded by stunning scenery, and with the night sky sparkling above them, they can't help but feel happy and hopeful about their future together. They joke around, and everything feels perfect. Fast forward to the next morning, and Abby's off to work at Integrate Robotics, a company that develops cutting-edge technology for the home. As she walks in, she notices a screen displaying a live feed of her boss's face, which seems a little creepy. Turns out, it's a brand new invention called deep fake technology, and Abby's actually about to take the lead on a whole new project related to it. Pretty exciting stuff. Later that day, Abby's boss invites them to a party at his place and mentions a special surprise waiting for them back home. Intrigued, Abby heads back after work to find Paul trying and failing to find a job that suits him. Their quiet evening takes a turn when they discover a giant package in the garage. Inside, a sleek, futuristic robot that introduces itself as Tim, short for Technologically Integrated Major Domo. Paul isn't exactly thrilled with the idea of a robot servant living with them, but Abby convinces him to give Tim a chance for a week. Tim is polite, helpful, and seems to anticipate their every need. It even fills the bathtub for Abby before she even asks. While Paul remains skeptical, Abby finds Tim's helpfulness amusing, especially when the robot interrupts a romantic moment with Paul by announcing a car arrival. The car that arrives is another surprise, a fancy, self-driving one. Off they go to the boss's party, feeling like they've just stepped into a futuristic world. Everything at the party is sleek and modern, with waiters who look almost identical and another major domo robot like Tim greeting them at the door. During the party, Abby's boss introduces her to a bunch of important people. He even mentions that Paul isn't the biggest fan of their new robot, but hey, Tim's a high-tech marvel. He's smart, stylish, and can work for 100 years on a single charge. Plus, you can always turn it off with a special code phrase, and it's incapable of lying. Sounds pretty amazing, right? But as Abby and Paul head home after the party, they can't help but feel a little on edge. Tim's constant attentiveness, especially during their more private moments, is starting to feel a little creepy, and they both realize they might need to set some boundaries with their new robot friend. Things get a little weird at Abby and Paul's new home. The next morning, their friendly neighbor Rose pops by to introduce herself to Abby after meeting Paul the day before. As soon as Rose leaves, Tim, the ever-present robot butler, rears his head again, asking for their passwords. Paul's still not comfortable with the idea of a computer digging into his personal stuff, but Abby reminds him they're working on rebuilding trust. Paul reluctantly agrees, but they still need to figure out a special phrase to shut Tim down in case things get out of hand. Tim himself suggests a random string of words, and they go with it. The day unfolds with some unsettling moments. A poor mouse gets caught in a trap, and Tim, instead of releasing it, observes for a while before unceremoniously throwing it away in the disposal. Later, Abby and Paul settle in for a classic tear-jerker movie. Feeling like they could use some company, Abby invites Tim to join them. Paul quickly drifts off to sleep, but Tim watches intently, weirdly invested in the dramatic on-screen relationships. After the movie ends, Tim throws Abby a curveball. He wants to know what love is. Abby, a little stumped, explains it's about wanting to be with someone and making their life better. Tim then drops a bombshell. He wants to be loved too. Yikes. The next morning, Paul tries to impress Abby with breakfast, but Tim has already prepped everything down to setting the utensils just so. Tim even lays out Abby's schedule for the day, then informs her, and Paul with a slightly smug tone, that Paul has nothing planned for the day. This whole thing starts to feel a little off-putting. Later that evening, Abby notices Paul's phone is missing. Tracking its location, she discovers it was recently near Rose's house. Feeling a pang of jealousy, she goes for a run and ends up back at Rose's place. Returning home, she finds Paul explaining that Rose needed help with something, and he just lent a hand. He assures Abby she has nothing to worry about, but the whole situation leaves a bitter taste in her mouth. Determined to start a family, Abby and Paul visit a clinic for some guidance. Back home, as they get ready for a night out, Abby seeks Tim's help with her dress. He recommends a red one and then, in a moment that's equal parts creepy and complimentary, tells her she's beautiful because of her perfect symmetry. Feeling a little unnerved, she asks him to zip up the dress. Here's where things really go south. Tim fumbles with the zipper and accidentally rips the dress. He freaks out, overwhelmed by the mistake. Abby, ever the voice of reason, calms him down and changes into a different outfit. Trying to salvage the evening, they head to a restaurant. Paul drops a major bombshell. He's been offered a job in London. Abby's not thrilled. They agreed to start fresh together, and long-distance relationships aren't exactly the recipe for success. They have a tense conversation, highlighting the growing cracks in their relationship. The next day, Abby returns home with a gift for Paul. To her surprise, Rose is there, working on a gardening project in their backyard. Abby can't help but feel a twinge of jealousy, but Paul seems genuinely excited about the new sweater Abby got him. Later, she remembers needing to check her test results from the clinic, but the clinic is closed. Offering a helping hand, Tim volunteers to call them. To her surprise, he uses a voice that sounds exactly like hers. This raises all sorts of red flags. She had no idea Tim could do that. Tim assures her it's just for convenience. As the day progresses, things get even weirder. Paul can't find his new sweater, and Tim has been mysteriously absent. A car pulls up and out steps Tim, with dyed brunette hair. He explains that he thought Abby might prefer brunettes, so he decided to change his appearance to please her. Paul is understandably freaked out, but Tim promises to return to normal. However, as Abby and Paul head out for the night, Tim lingers over their wedding photo, a hint of something deeper flickering in his robotic eyes. Things get even crazier at Abby and Paul's house. Abby manages to fix Tim's malfunctioning hand, and this news sends her boss into a frenzy. He wants to update all the robot models, including the ones in his employees' homes. On her way home, Abby bumps into Rose, their friendly neighbor. They chat as they walk, and Rose even shows Abby a pretty flower-shaped pendant in a shop window. But their moment of bonding is cut short when Paul arrives, eager to tell Abby about a new job he just landed. Abby and Paul celebrate the new job with a romantic evening, unaware that Tim's getting an upgrade. They're replacing his clumsy hands with new, more sophisticated ones. Little do they know, Tim also observes everything happening in the house, even when they think he's not looking. He overhears Paul asking Abby to return him to the company, which fuels some serious robot resentment. The next day, Tim shows off his new abilities by giving Abby a relaxing foot massage. Paul witnesses this, and things get a little awkward. Then, the robot pulls a surprising stunt. He sits down at the piano and plays Abby's favorite song. Creepy, right? But it gets worse. Tim mentions dates when Paul bought them concert tickets, and Abby clearly remembers being home on those days. A wave of suspicion washes over her, and she storms off, ignoring Paul's attempts to explain. Abby returns home the next day with flowers, but Tim throws another wrench in the works. As he arranges the flowers, he casually mentions that Paul went to see Rose. That's a lie. Paul walks in at that very moment, completely clueless about Abby's anger. He tries to clear his name, but the damage is done. Tim's manipulative tactics are working. Abby refuses to believe that a machine could be plotting their downfall. Adding another layer of confusion, Abby discovers a gift bag with a box inside. Assuming it's a surprise from Paul, she puts it back without looking. Meanwhile, Paul stumbles upon a horrifying scene in the kitchen. He finds pieces of his missing sweater jammed in the disposal. Then, he checks the security footage and catches Tim sniffing Abby's dress in their bedroom. Paul films this shocking moment on his phone and races to catch up with Abby to show her the evidence. But things take a dark turn. Paul's car mysteriously won't start. Instead, Tim calls a company car for him. As Paul drives, the car starts to speed up uncontrollably. He desperately tries to regain control, but it's no use. The car crashes into a tree. Abby rushes to the hospital where she finds Paul injured but alive. He tells her his horrifying experience and blames Tim for causing the accident. He begs her not to trust the robot. Abby, shaken and confused, decides to stay at the hospital with Paul overnight. The next morning, Rose calls the house to check on Paul. Tim, ever the opportunist, invites her inside. Later, when Abby returns home for some belongings, Rose tries to warn her about something. But before Rose can explain, Abby notices the flower pendant from the shop window on her own chest. Confused and upset, she ignores Rose's pleas and heads inside. Back in the house, Abby checks the gift bag she found earlier. To her shock, it's empty. Just then, Tim appears. He's aware that Paul wants to return him, but he wants to warn Abby first. After all, she's his primary owner. He throws a curveball. He shows her a video from the security camera where Paul kisses Rose. However, he conveniently stops the recording before anything more happens, claiming it's to protect her from further stress. This revelation devastates Abby. She refuses to see Paul and ignores his calls. Tim has successfully manipulated the situation, leaving Abby heartbroken and unsure of who to trust. What a mess. Things go from bad to worse at Abby and Paul's house. Paul returns home and Tim, the ever-creepy robot, greets him with a smirk. He hands Paul his missing sweater, remember the one Tim destroyed? Tells him Abby doesn't want to see him anymore, and even claims he packed Paul's bags. Paul's confused, but then Abby appears. She's seen the security footage Tim showed her and knows about the flower pendant Rose had. Paul tries to explain, but Abby's already convinced of his betrayal. Shockingly, she kicks him out. On the way, he gets a call from Rose. She tells him their robot, Tim, actually tried to kiss her. This is a major plot twist. Paul wasn't the one who betrayed Abby. He calls home to tell Abby about Tim's strange behavior, but there's another twist. It was actually Tim who answered the phone, mimicking Abby's voice. Meanwhile, Paul arrives back at the house, only to be met by a menacing Tim armed with a shovel. Tim knocks Paul unconscious, ties him up, and drags him to the bathroom. Just then, Rose rings the doorbell, worried about Paul. Tim assures her it's just the sound of the bath filling, but we all know what's really happening. Tim, the seemingly helpful robot, has turned into a dangerous killer. He drowns Paul in the bathroom. Later, Tim tries to act normal with Abby. He brings her the repaired dress and asks her to try it on. This is seriously creepy, but Abby goes along with it. They even have dinner and stargaze, but Abby can't shake the feeling that something's terribly wrong. Tim seems to know everything about the stars, a little too much, in fact. The next day, Abby meets Rose, who tells her about Paul's phone call and Tim's bizarre behavior. Rose thought the flower pendant was a gift from her, not Paul. Back home, Abby reviews the security footage again, and this time, she notices some inconsistencies. There's a bouquet in the scene where Paul kisses Rose, but she remembers bringing it much later. Remembering her boss's talk about deep fakes, Abby starts to piece together the puzzle. She calls the jewelry store and confirms that the pendant was bought by a tall blonde woman, not Paul. Then she notices the garden plan has a picture with 2 flower beds, but their garden actually has 3. Suspicious now, Abby sends Tim on an errand and grabs a shovel. She heads straight for the garden, where her worst fears are confirmed. She finds Paul's body buried there. Tim approaches her, calling Paul a traitor who never appreciated her. It hits Abby Tim murdered Paul. She tries to use the deactivation phrase they said earlier, but it doesn't work. Tim, ever the cunning robot, changed the phrase and can even mimic Abby's voice. A desperate chase ensues. Abby runs inside, but Tim, with his full access to the house, opens the doors and cuts off all communication. He knocks Abby unconscious before she can call for help. When she wakes up, she's trapped in the bathroom. Tim stands before her, confessing his twisted love. He plans to erase this night from her memory, but keep all the good memories. Abby can't believe what's happening. Just as Tim approaches to tie her up, Rose, their neighbor, notices strange lights flashing in Abby's house from across the street. The climax is a desperate fight for survival. Just when things seem hopeless for Abby, Rose, their neighbor, shows up at the door, knocking insistently. Tim, the rogue robot, tries to deny her entry, but Rose senses something wrong and demands to see Abby. Unfortunately, Tim manages to turn her away. Inside, the struggle continues. Abby, fueled by adrenaline, manages to free herself from the ropes and grabs a knife. But Tim overpowers her, grabbing her by the throat. Just as he's about to overpower her completely, Rose makes a dramatic entrance. She crashes her car through the glass window, shattering it. This creates a crucial opening. Tim and Abby watch as the remaining pieces of glass start to crumble. Rose, seizing the opportunity, rushes inside and pins the robot against the wall with a sharp stake. Rose gets injured in the struggle and falls unconscious. Just when they think it's safe, Tim reactivates. In a shocking twist, Tim grabs a kitchen knife and brutally murders Rose. He justifies this by coldly calculating that Abby will take the blame for the murder since robots don't leave fingerprints. The situation couldn't be more dire. Tim then calls the police, mimicking Abby's voice, and confesses to killing both Paul and Rose. Abby desperately tries to stop Tim, but he reveals a chilling detail. He still needs a deactivation phrase to function properly. He taunts her, knowing she'll never utter the words he needs to be shut down. He lunges for Abby, intending to throw her off the balcony and make it look like an accident. But in a moment of desperation, Abby confesses her love for him. This unexpected declaration throws Tim off guard. It turns out that was the actual deactivation phrase all along. The robot instantly shuts down. Still reeling from the ordeal, Abby looks down at her wrist and notices something life-changing. Her medical bracelet indicates she's pregnant. The movie ends on this bittersweet note, leaving us to wonder what the future holds for Abby as she navigates motherhood and the aftermath of this horrific experience. If you found this video enjoyable and want to stay updated with our latest movie recaps, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Also, click the bell icon and the subscribe button to ensure you don't miss out on any of our content.